Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. So today what I'd like to take you through is I'd like to talk about why traditional static stretching doesn't work, or more specifically, it doesn't do what we've expected it to do for so many years now. And towards the end of the video, we sort of want to transition across to what you should be doing instead. So the idea of stretching is obviously really important. We know that if your muscles are tight, then you potentially have an increased risk of injury. You can't perform at your best. We know that warming up and stretching tight tissue is really important pre-exercise. Cooling down afterwards is also important. But this idea that your muscles need to get looser, for a lot of us, is really important and crucial to getting you to where you want to be athletically or functionally day to day. But what I've sort of seen over the years is that the way that we've been trying to address that by statically stretching our tissue, which is basically just putting your tissue into a position like a calf stretch, for example, and just holding that for 15 to 30 seconds, that model doesn't work. And the reason why that doesn't work is because it doesn't necessarily respect the anatomy and the function of that area. And it doesn't necessarily respect why muscles have become tight in the first place. So just to provide some context for this before we get into it, is that muscles become tight for a couple of really simple reasons. The first one is that it becomes tight to support poor function or poor loading. So if the way that you move or the way that you sit and position yourself isn't respecting the anatomy, doesn't respect the way that your body likes to function. So if we talk about sitting, if you're up nice and tall versus a little bit slouchy, your upper traps, the muscles in your shoulders can become tight because we're unknowingly asking them to by just hanging off that tissue, and they become tight as a response to that. Further to that, if there's an injury or there's some dysfunction involved, muscles will become tight because your brain has asked them to, which is the crucial piece of the puzzle here. So muscular tightness as a rule is just a signal from your brain that it needs to help. So what passive static stretching has done for so many years is it's sort of looked at muscular tightness as more of a passive piece of meat that's just elastically become a bit tighter or shortened. So the static stretching model sort of proposes that we just put that tissue on tension and hold it for long enough in the hope that it starts to give and starts to free up. But the reason why this doesn't necessarily work is because the muscle isn't a piece of meat, a lifeless piece of meat. It's part of a neuromuscular combination where your brain and nervous system have control over that muscle. So without us realizing it, all tightness is just our brain and nervous system requesting that area becomes tighter to serve a different purpose, a dysfunctional purpose, to support some dysfunction that we didn't necessarily know that's there or we're not conscious of. So just pulling on that tissue without respecting that relationship, it's no wonder that it doesn't work. So that model of just passively holding a stretch and then doing it for as long as you can, for days, weeks, months, or years, is a bit of a broken model, because what it does is not only does it not necessarily make you looser, but it doesn't get you to the point where you stop having to do that. So if you get up and stretch your calves every morning, at no point does that model really get us to the point where you don't have to stretch your calves anymore. So if you stretch it and it feels maybe a little bit looser, there's every chance that it's going to be tight again by the next day. So you're just stuck in this perpetual cycle, this groundhog day of consistently passively stretching tissue. Because we know that we should, or we're told that we have to, that it's important. And I think this is one of the reasons why a lot of people don't enjoy stretching, or they feel like stretching is a chore, because when they do it, they don't necessarily feel like they're working towards something, or there's no long-term reward, or there's no decrease in them having to do it as time goes on. So I think from that perspective, it's really important to touch on that idea. And if you're watching this at home and you've done any type of stretching, you'll know that or you probably may not have thought about it consciously, but thinking back to it, it doesn't necessarily make you feel amazingly different afterwards. It's more so that we do it in the hope that the theory checks out, that the idea why we do it's important and it makes sense, but the application and the results aren't necessarily there. So what we want to transition to is this new model of stretching that's been around for a while, so it's not really new, but for those who don't know, we've covered this a lot in videos previously, so if you've been following along, this probably won't be new to you, but the model that we want to promote that is the fastest way to make tight tissue release, and it should happen almost instantly, and the more you do it, the looser it'll keep getting, is this model called PNF stretching, or proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation. And a lot of people might know this as contract relax or hold relax stretching, because what it does is if you put yourself into a stretch position, so if I'm trying to stretch the muscles of my forearm here, just like any other stretch, I just put myself into a position where I feel some tension or some tightness in that forearm, which I can feel here. But the difference here is instead of holding that stretch for 15 to 30 seconds and hoping that something changes, which ultimately it probably won't, we want to activate the muscle that we're stretching. So we want to get that tightened muscle, so this forearm muscle here, I want to tense that up. So I can either do that by pushing back into the stretch, or I can just try and tense everything up in the area. So how it works basically is I put the muscle on stretch, I tense the area, I tense the muscle for 5 to 10 seconds, I hold that, I get my brain involved, I maximally contract the muscle so that when I stop doing that and relax, that muscle maximally relaxes as well. And what happens here is it can physically pull that tissue back to normal, it can give your brain and nervous system confidence to release and let go and sort of re-establish normal mobility in that tissue. So the way that we do this officially is by doing the stretch, the contract, and then the relax. You don't take the tension off the stretch, so you keep the tension on there, contract, relax, and then when you've relaxed, you should feel like there's a little bit more movement in that tissue straight away. And then we just repeat that process until you stop making change. So it's a really important model because what you should always expect after doing the PNF model is that you should always feel like your tissue is immediately looser. Separate to the previous regime of stretching where we just stretch in the hope that something happens, this stretching should genuinely make a difference straight away. And if you haven't seen a difference, you haven't made one. So you don't need to guess, you don't need to take anyone's word for it, particularly mine. Once you've done that stretching regime, you should feel like that tissue is now looser. So it's really important to do before exercise because you can physically improve the mechanics of an area, restore more normal motion to that than it would have been otherwise, so that you can perform better and decrease your risk of injury, which is the whole purpose of why we're doing this sort of stuff in the first place. So I think the really important thing to note about the PNF model is that it works, but more importantly, it respects that brain, nervous system, muscular connection where it gets the brain involved. It gives it permission to release and to free things up in a really safe way. So I thought it would be really nice just to point that out. Again, it's not to say that traditional stretching is wrong. In theory, it makes perfect sense, but the application of it, when we take a step back and look at what it's trying to do versus what we need to happen for the muscular tissue to free up, there's a big disconnect between those two ideas. And again, as I said before, it's probably the main reason why people don't like stretching. We feel like it's a chore, it's not very sexy, and the reason why a lot of stretching routines don't necessarily help prevent injury, we don't necessarily see those results from doing those stretches, so we can't expect a functional change in that area. So hopefully that's a nice little insight into how to optimize your stretching routine. It's worth noting that it works for any stretch, so you don't have to do a particular stretch to use this. You just have to put your body into a position that exposes some tightness that you want to free up. You just want to activate and tense that tightness, hold it for 5 to 10 seconds, relax, take it further into that stretch, and just keep chasing that tightness as it goes away. And then as you move around afterwards, you should just genuinely feel better. So hopefully that was useful. If that's something new to you, or if you've heard of PNF stretching before, let us know in the comments below. I'm always interested to know where people have come from and what they're thinking about their stretching. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like, and if you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing. It all helps these videos sort of reach more people. I guess the idea behind these is we want to promote a lot of the ideas that we're talking about in the clinic, clinically in general, because I think one of the hallmarks of the medical industry is that information's rapidly changing, or at least that's how it used to be, but now we're getting to the point where we're actually starting to figure things out. We're actually starting to say, well, look, this is the way that things are supposed to be. Whereas previously we used to think it was important, but we didn't necessarily have the perspective to back that up. So ultimately the theory makes sense, but the application and the results don't necessarily mesh together until we start to figure it out better. And this PNF model, which again, probably been around for 20, 25 years now, but for some reason it's just not well known. This needs to be where we put all our energy into stretching. You don't have to do it for 30 seconds, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. All you need to do is walk away feeling different. And obviously the more change you want to make, the longer you'll do it for. But I can't speak highly enough for it. So if that was helpful, I hope it was, but let us know below. And again, keep an eye out for the next video. We'll bring one out maybe tomorrow or the next day. But until then, see you soon. Bye.